Well, Meloni's talks with Vance come on the heels of her visit to Washington, D.C. There, she met with Donald Trump, who said that he believed a trade deal with the EU would be reached soon. Now, Meloni has assumed something of a mediating role between the European Union and the United States since Trump took office, especially in the wake of his new tariffs. A 10% tariff on EU imports is currently in place.
Georgia Meloni arrived in Washington in her official role as Italian Prime Minister. However, her unofficial role was the main focus back in Europe. Meloni has cast herself as a bridge between Brussels and Washington since Trump moved back into the White House in January. The Italian Prime Minister is the only European leader to attend Donald Trump's inauguration. And now she is the first to meet the president face-to-face since he announced, then suspended, 20% tariffs on European exports.
I want to hear what you said.
Inside the Oval Office, the president said he would 100% reach a tariffs deal with the European Union before heaping praise on his Italian counterpart.
It's an honor to have the Prime Minister of Italy with us, Prime Minister Meloni, who's doing a fantastic job. I would say that she has taken Europe by storm and highly respected. Everybody loves her and respects her, and I can't say that about many people. And she's become a friend.
Meloni highlighted her political common ground with the US president, even paraphrasing his best-known slogan.
I think even if we have some problems, between the two shores of the Atlantic, it is the time that we try to sit down and find solutions. So I want to thank President Trump. The goal for me is to make the West great again. Okay? And I think we can do it together.
We can.
A successful visit for Georgia Meloni, not just in Washington, but also back in Brussels. Europe hopes that she can traverse the increasingly choppy waters currently dividing the two sides of the Atlantic.
So this is a really interesting story here. Let's see if we can bring in Antonio Zotti to speak about it a bit more. He is a political scientist at the Catholic University of the Sacred Heart in Milan. So welcome, first of all. We have Donald Trump saying he's now 100% sure of an EU tariff deal. Does that mean that Meloni's visit was a success?
Well, it's quite, first of all, thank you for having me here. It's quite difficult to say if that is actually the case or not, because due to the highly unpredictable political and economic landscape which was created by the Trump administration itself, high praises and shows of admiration only count relatively. Yes, sure, Italy and in particular Giorgia Meloni may play a role in creating at least less tense relations with the US, maybe in view of creating a coalition vis-a-vis the rising role of China in the emerging new international political and economic order. On the other hand, though, there's nothing that allows us to rule out the possibility that the US administration will keep in play up differences, in driving wedges between member states, possibly through these special relationships with governments that are perceived as being like-minded like Italy's. And in doing so, of course, there's also this trend that has already emerged throughout these early months of the US administration, the goal of undermining to a certain extent the European Union's governance and legitimacy at large.
Yeah. At least for now, though, as you say, Giorgia Meloni does seem to be getting a lot of attention from the Trump administration. I mean, she's visited the White House, and just a day later, she's receiving Vice President Vance in Rome. What do you think are Washington's interests with her specifically here?
Well, one has to consider that Italy's relative weight within the European Union has increased since Brexit, because Italy has more of an opportunity to play up with the other big shots within the Union. And again, I think the US administration sees in Meloni sort of a European branch of the kind of new ideology, anti-globalization, or at least aimed at reshuffling the international order that they have been pushing for. On the other hand, these success, these increased credit, both domestically and internationally, that the government led by Meloni has acquired, may come at the expense of the internal stability of the coalition that is currently ruling in Italy. It is telling that the Matteo Salvini, the leader of a junior partner of the ruling coalition, has been even more stripped off of the role that he was hoping to play as a special connection with the US administration. These, of course, may create some problem in the, if not the short term, over the rest of the legislature in Italy. So the success does not come completely free of possible dangers. On the other hand, yes, I guess that the US administration does hope to get some help from Giorgia Meloni and from the Italian government in general to come up with a trade agreement. On the other hand, again, Giorgia Meloni is quite prone to be also used as a spanner to throw into the workings of the European Union. So I would say that as far as we can say, there are both promising perspectives here, but also possible dangers of the Italian government being used again as a weapon against Brussels.
Just very briefly before I let you go, let's pick up on that last point, that there were fears that Meloni could potentially turn her back on European partners, especially on things like maybe softening her stance on the war in Ukraine. But it does seem like she's managed to please both the EU and Trump so far. What do you make of this balancing act?
Well, this is one of the credit that has to be acknowledged in favor of Giorgia Meloni, because actually in Italy, traditionally, the pursuit of, let's say, more Atlantist goals and the aim of participating into the European integration process has quite rarely been conceived as being at odds with each other. They have been only rarely regarded as being alternatives. On the other hand, it also has to be considered that Meloni's political platform, especially the core of her supporters, is definitely does not have much love for either the European Union and in particular the current president of the European Commission. And yet Meloni has been able to toe the line as far as Ukraine was concerned. It's also quite significant that the only difficult questions during the meeting with the press was coming from an Italian journalist. The only question that was asked in Italian, but Meloni did not shy away from her role as the representative of the European Union. So that is quite promising. But again, in Italy, the center-right coalition is characterized by a high volatility of voters. So voters at elections tend to opt for the party within the coalition which has the highest possibilities of getting the biggest share of the votes. So in that sense, in doing that, Meloni is also trying to keep together an electorate that is made up both of long-term believers, but also of people who only voted for her for the time being.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today on DW News with your insights. We've been speaking with political scientist Antonio Zotti in Milan.
Thank you.
And for more on this, I'm going to talk to Riccardo Alcaro. He is an analyst at the Italian think tank, the Insitute for International Affairs. He's joining me from Rome. Welcome to DW, Riccardo. Giorgia Meloni has styled herself as a bridge between the European Union and the Trump administration. Did she make any ground with this visit? Does this now create more room for a trade deal between the EU and the US?
Good morning. I think it does, although we shouldn't be excessively hopeful given the unpredictability and general hostility towards the EU shown, espoused by President Trump over the years. But look, Meloni had three goals when she made her trip to Washington. She wanted to defend Italian commercial interests, very much hit by US tariffs. She wanted to reiterate Italy's proximity to the United States and her own closeness to this specific Trump administration, right-wing administration. And she wanted to do all this without creating fracture inside the EU. And to the extent that was possible, to the extent that reconciling these goals was possible, she did score some important results. Trump has openly expressed the certainty that there will be a deal with Europe. So this is, as far as I can recall, the first time he has mentioned a deal on tariffs with Europe, implicitly recognizing that it will have to be with Europe, so as a unitary bloc. And he has also agreed to come over to Italy in the next future. And on that occasion, Meloni would like to turn that into a multilateral dialogue with other European leaders, especially European Commission President von der Leyen. But I'm not entirely sure that would be possible.
Right. And on Ukraine, you've just had the US Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, leaving Europe, suggesting that Washington could stop its efforts to negotiate peace in Ukraine. We know that there are differing views within the European Union about the war in Ukraine. But would Georgia Meloni be appealing to Donald Trump to stay in the game, so to say?
Yeah, she will be doing that. I mean, Meloni's line is never to criticize Trump, always insist on the advantages of transatlantic cooperation, even when Trump is pursuing a completely different policy line, actually creating divisions across the Atlantic. But she will keep insisting on doing something together, and because her belief is that the West is a hierarchical coalition of nations centered on the United States, and that if the United States shifts position, it is the responsibility and the duty of European countries to adapt, not the other way around.
Riccardo, as you were saying earlier, Trump and Meloni have a lot in common. They get along really well. We could see that in their interactions at the White House. Could their relationship have an influence on EU-US policy?
Look, it might. There are, however, there are ideological affinities between the two. Okay, Meloni sees the West as a community of nations of European descent linked to one another by history, tradition, and religion, much more than they are by the universalistic values of liberal democracy. And this is in line with the ideology espoused by the Trump administration. However, while Meloni sees the transatlantic relationship as a strategic alliance, Trump isn't really sure about that, doesn't believe in long-term alliances, and really doesn't like the Europeans. So the issue here is whether Meloni can find some common ground in terms of pushing inside the EU for meeting the United States administration halfway on issues like environmental regulations or leniency in the investigations that the European Commission has opened against big tech and stuff like that. But there will be limits to what Meloni can do. But for as much as she, to the extent she can do something, she will always be happy with that, because dealing with Trump is quite difficult, even for her.
Well, thanks for that, Riccardo Alcaro from the Institute for International Affairs, joining us from Rome. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.